Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with my dear friend, Jeremias. Each week, we kind of jump out of an airplane and parachute into a conversation somewhere. No intent where we land. We just land where we do. And we have a lot of fun doing it. But our main, guardrails, if you will, we're really kind of seeking a path to empowerment. And I think all of us have got things going on in our lives. And I'll tell you what, since COVID is over, my contact with human beings has gone up about 700%. Funny enough, a lot of it still is online or at a distance. However, the fact of the matter is that there are people who are still trying to get their legs underneath them. Still trying to figure out a way forward. And I'm especially feeling that way given the disasters that we've lived through in the last 90 to 120 days between hurricanes, fires, earthquakes, et cetera, et cetera. There's just a lot of people at this point who are at ends. We've also lived through a pretty, hard to understand with regard to, will it end? Is there an end to it? The increase in just what it costs to stay alive, the roof over your head, food in your mouth, taking care of friends and animals and that sort of thing. We're distanced from our, shall we say, placid place where we could be mindfully present to all things going on. There's a few more things going on at the moment than most of us can wrap our mind around.
Yeah, and I think then also, I think that I agree with you, Bill. And I think to speak to a lot of those hardships, or let's say extreme circumstances that are happening, whether those be financially or natural disaster wise, is, there's always that element of good of people who do show up, or who do to me, I think about one of my students whose son is a forest firefighter. The people who do come in from all over the world to help and to assist.
Mm.
Even within that, though, there's that, which is beautiful. But then there's also those elements of resources and financial means to help. And then, to be honest, of thinking that you have a backup and then that backup falls through, or, and then all of a sudden you're left and you're like, okay, well, I thought I had a place to stay, or I thought, I don't know, I'll get practical and I'm not being speaking of anybody specific, but I thought, I had this coverage on my house, which I thought would cover something like this. And now I find out it doesn't, and, all those different kinds of circumstances where you're like, now what do I do? Like,
Right.
now what? Now what?
For example, you and I do not have flood insurance. We just don't.
Right.
And the reason that we don't is because neither one of our homes have been flooded in the last 500 years. So it's not a requirement of the folks that lend us money or what have you.
Right.
But the point is that all of those big disasters, those are easy for us to kind of designate. I mean, if you've ever stood at the bottom of the Empire State Building and looked up, it is unrecognizable from the street level. You can't tell that it is the Empire State Building, when you're standing at street level. I've done it. So the other things that you and I experience on a daily and weekly basis, especially the ones that we think the rest of our family and tribe should understand and should be coming to our aid, for example, um, they're kind of not doing that as much as they used to. And I'm wondering, what's up with that?
If they ever did. I mean, I never had a huge support system in regard to that. As far
Yep.
as family, friends, yes. I know as far as my friends go, they have a lot going on right now. They have a
Yes.
lot of stuff happening. So they and I think what some of what we're talking about, and I'm not talking about natural disasters, I'm talking about personal circumstances where, people are at different times of their lives, which was always an element. But all of a sudden that changes. I have a lot more friends now who have older parents,
Right.
are dealing with that as opposed to, navigating that whole landscape, so to speak, of older parents and having to deal with caregiving and working. Or I have a lot more friends who's, let's say, have left the more traditional work environment and a lot more entrepreneurial on their own for many reasons, whether that be because of, restructuring of restructuring of companies, or that just involves the fact that they no longer resonated with their work life and what was happening. But I have a lot of people kind of like navigating the unknown. Let's just say that that's a good way to put it. Like navigating the unknown.
Well, see, there's a kind of an ethereal quality to what you're talking about. Like it lacks form and substance to be able to, really communicate and understand. And I can tell you, it's quite different when I was going to the office every day and I had 16 employees. And I had probably upwards of 200 or 300 networking buddies from the different, um, uh, you know, boards that I was on and my volunteer work and church and all the rest of that, my support system was quite different than it is right now. I have a lot of what I call really close superficial relationships. I love so many people in my life, and I don't hold them to account for anything. And they don't hold me to account for anything. We don't have that kind of relationship, right? In the day, I lived, in um, a culture of accountability where everyone had things that were expected. You want to talk about what accountability is. All you have to do is ask the following questions. So, what are you accountable for? And how you can test that is if it ain't going right, are people going to come looking for you? You know, that's accountability. And I think at this point in my life, I can't speak for you, Jan, but there are very few people who I think actually know or understand what a daily routine looks like for me, or where I'm involved these days. Where before, even though I've always been a pretty public person, That means that I've always been available for people, to ask questions of. Um, they got deep into my business. They got deep into my family. All the rest of that sort of stuff. I am still that way, but mostly it's two dimensional on social media. LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram they're not real. They're wonderful places where I've cultivated all sorts of relationships with people. But you want to know how I can test it in a heartbeat and find out whether they're real relationships or not? If I ask somebody who I've been friends with on Facebook for 10 years whether or not they want to meet me for lunch, and their first response is your wife coming?
Stay warm and save every day, all in the Kroger app. Get 10 for $10 on select varieties of Kroger pasta, Starkist tuna pouches, or Powerade. Then get flavorful fresh Heritage Farm chicken split breast, drumsticks, or thighs for $1.49 a pound, all with your card. Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
I know that we're really not that close a friend, right? You know what I'm talking about. My wife doesn't care where I go because she actually knows that wherever I go, I'm going to be there. I set my own standards, and they're usually much higher than the people I'm meeting with, by the way. So my code of conduct, has always been don't do anything that you wouldn't stand up in church and proclaim to the rest of the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there have been some things that have skirted that where I wouldn't be proud to stand up in front of the church and tell them, but I would, because that's my code of conduct. You know what I'm saying? And the fact of the matter is it would be less interesting to them than what they read on the back of a milk box in the morning, right? They wouldn't care. And no matter how bad it seemed to me and how flush my face might be and all the rest of it, and that all of that caring about what other people think is really more or less a self-imposed test of reasonableness as to whether or not you're in relationship with these people, because you don't care about people's reaction if you don't care about them, right?
Well, as you're talking, Bill, I guess like it just shows you the difference between human beings, and let's say upbringing and history. And I was just having this conversation about basically about location and culture sort of forming who you are. So my friend Mohiba grew up in Tunisia, and I don't know. So she said I was born like I was a child in the mid 20th century. So that gives you an idea of where she falls as far as age group.
Right.
She talked about certain sort of behaviors that were like the fact that you didn't waste anything. Like she said, if it was cooked for dinner, any left, or like if you made couscous for dinner, it was used in a sauce the next day. And if you like everything was sustainable, like everything, like clothes were like passed down and like to like almost like to an umpteenth degree, and how that
Yes.
kind of formed who she was. And I think we don't understand. Like for me, based on my history, every person I meet, if they need help, I'm going to help them, whether they're a close person or a distant person. Like
Right.
if you need help or if you ask me for something or if I can help you in some way, I'm going to check in on you, whether you be a client, a student, a friend, I mean, a family member. Like I'm going to do that. That's just who I am. Everybody becomes family in my book. And that's how I live. And I think that I had this conversation on one of my audio events with my friend Mary Jane, which are now on YouTube, just to give myself a plug there um, on our YouTube channel. That that sometimes makes it very hard for me to understand when people don't reciprocate in that way. Like it's very challenging because I expect everybody to be like that. It's kind of like how I navigate the world. And so when people don't do that, I'm kind of puzzled. At first, I used to blame myself and think that I had done something like, what did I do? Now I don't do that. And I realize, but it's not easy sometimes because I feel like everybody should do that. Like, and so it's just, so for me, I think I navigate the world thinking that, like, if you're a friend or family and you call me and you say, Jan, I have a question, I'm going to answer it. And if I can't answer it, I'll call you back and answer it, you know? or get back to you if I don't know or something. But I navigate the world thinking everybody is like that.
So, what do we say about what you know? What you know is not terribly useful. And the evidence that you get by actually putting your boat in water to see if it floats is far more, it's life. I mean, that's what's really going on out there. And the reason I told you the story about the difference between, 15 years ago when I had a full-blown operating company and all that stuff, with all the real estate holdings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now is if I needed something, there were people that heard before I asked in the day. Now, not so much. And there are people that I can ask 2, 3, 4 times in different sort of ways. But now I'm finding if I ask a direct question, will you do this for me by this date? I'll get an answer, either a yes or a no. I can't leave it up to people to like figure out what I need in my life, because I think that most people feel like I don't need anything, you know? And
Good
for
point.
the most part, I think that's pretty much a true story. And if they feel that way, that's what I built out there, right? I didn't come out, into the world being somebody who has to be helped along to do this, that, or the other thing. And I think you're much the same way when you're in a leadership position. And when people look at you like you've got a couple of more chapters, you're a couple of chapters ahead in the book of life, from where they consider themselves to be, how could you need anything, right? So what I'm finding is that, part of the time when I'm making requests of people, it's not because I really need them to do it or even need anybody else to do it at all. Maybe I just want to spend time with them.
I mean, I think at this point, for certain things, I do need help, but I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think it's not like we spoke about. It wasn't some. I mean, I learned to be very self-reliant, self-sufficient, kind of like, at a very young age. I mean, some of that was like I just spoke about family and culture.
Right.
I mean, the fact that nothing was given to you, we had jobs from the time we were really good, young, from the time, whether that be babysitting or bringing in somebody's newspaper or helping with yard work or shoveling. Like, if you went out, you wanted something, you know, maybe you got an allowance, and that was really not much of an allowance, but basically it was like go out and make money, go out if you want to, like, if, you know, and that was just a part of who, and I'm not critical of that at all. Like, I think it was great, actually.
Yeah.
I love that aspect or quality that my parents instilled in us, that like, if you want something, you get out and you do something to get it. You go out and you get a job, or you do something to get paid.
Right.
Um, and so I love that aspect. So I've also been very, very self-sufficient and self-reliant, and through the years, asked people for very, very little in regard to that aspect. Like, it was very important to me to be independent.
So the thing is all of that's true. Okay. It's as true as it is. And the fact of the matter is, having lived your life that way, you're going to have to invent new language. You and I are going to have to get better at really clearly identifying that this is one of those times where we were going to spend some of our social capital. We've spent a lifetime doing good works that somewhere, someplace, this thing they call karma has been keeping track of, but it does a shit job of bringing it to us without being asked specifically, right?
I, I love that. Yeah, somewhere, something, there's a scorebook, and we've been accumulating a lot there.
We want to believe that. We really do. Okay. That's part of what's kept us going on those dark days when everything was going out that way, and didn't seem
Exactly.
like much was coming in.
Absolutely. And I love that image of like that, and no matter what, I think what your background is, you kind of believe that. You kind of believe that there's must be some sort of like record, like like the virtual Santa list or something, when you're a kid, to like to the Day of Atonement when you're Jewish, and there's like a score of like, okay, these were my good deeds for the year, and these were my things I didn't do, like my sins, or the things I didn't do well for the year.
Yeah.
And so there is that kind of virtual scorebook.
Well, see, here's the other neat thing for you is that all those times when you thought you weren't keeping score, how you find out that you really were is when you're resentful of somebody not giving back, right? I guess I really was keeping score, wasn't I? I wasn't really
But
doing it
right.
for,
No, no.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you there. It's like this feeling of like, how do you separate so that you're doing it purely for, I don't want to even, it's not even good. It's beyond good. Like you're doing it purely for like the right reason. And that reason is not to receive. It's that for yourself. That reason is purely to help somebody else.
Well,
And
I like what you're saying, and good luck with that. I
right,
think
but it's
yeah,
yeah,
really the only shot you have is to notice when you're feeling like the past is back up in your face again, and it's giving you a bad taste in your mouth, to be responsible for that bad taste here and now.
right.
Good luck with the next thing you're going to do. I mean, we all get out of bed wanting to be Mother Teresa, or maybe uh, I don't even know at this point. We want to be helpful in the world, but then we find out that no matter how much help we give, they're going to bring more people in here who need more help than we can ever possibly give. And oh, by the way, that's starting to affect our quality of life too. And hey, wait a minute, now things are scarce, and uh, I have never in my life had my dollars be worth less than they are right now in terms of turning into goods and services.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you there wholeheartedly. I mean, things that, because I had this whole discussion with my mother, because my mother was asking me, we were discussing some stuff, and she was like, let's say, why do you think things are more challenging now? I said, well, because I said things are so much more expensive now. So, even if I'm making, let's say, the same that I was, let's say, last year or the year before,
Yeah,
everyday items are so much more. So, and I'm saying everyday items, I'm not even also talking about food and gas. Like I'm talking about things like, utilities and insurance and all the other things, which are, let's say, the normal things of, let's say, living and navigating life. I'm not talking
right.
about extravagance, and I'm not talking about entertainment, which is, for me, like eating out or going to the movies or anything like that. That's like, that's to me like the candle on the cake. That's not even like in the realm or even in the equation. It's much more like practical things, like you can't drive without auto insurance, like that kind of thing, so
Right.
maybe, so it's all those common things, which now all of a sudden that money is spread so much thinner. And I was having a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who was talking about, I guess she was talking about I think it was a family member or somebody who she knows whose kids have postponed getting married. And, I know there's all this documentation out there why less people are actually formally getting married. And I'm not saying this is the circumstance for everyone, but in this case, the woman has some sort of medical condition, and right now her insurance is one, and it will be covered by her insurance. When she gets married, she has to redo her insurance, so she's on her husband's plan.
Right.
On her husband's plan, that medication isn't covered, and that's hundreds of dollars a month. So basically, they can't afford to get married.
Right.
So they now postpone getting married for like a few years because they're limited as far as, that. And it was like those circumstances, which I think are just like, in a way, like I look at and I'm like, that's so disturbing to me, because I feel like, you know, They want to get married and dedicate their lives to each other and sort of claim to the world that you know, they're this, whatever the reason why they want to get married, which why people get married. But the fact that that's what's stopping them really bothers me.
Yeah. Well, see, I'll tell you what, this is nothing new. Okay.
No, I know it's not.
I met my wife at a dorm party in 1974. I knew I was going to marry her the moment I laid eyes on her. She was the woman I had been looking for, throughout my dating career, whenever that started. But I'd had a dream about her when I was 12 years old. So, of course, I recognized who she was. I spent the rest of that evening just testing whether or not it was really her, and stayed up with her talking until 5 o'clock in the morning, and then went home and told my parents. They were sitting up on Sunday morning after I went to this dorm party, and my dad was saying, "You better have a good story," after being out all night long, right? And my mother said, "Well, what went on?" And I said, "Last night, I said I met the girl that I dreamt about when I was 12 years old." She said, "You mean the blonde that was pushing the bicycle, that just radiated?" And I said, "Yeah, that's her." And so there we were. I would have married her the next weekend. But guess what? She was in college. And because she was in college, she had a dad who was 74 years old. He was on Social Security. And because she was a dependent of somebody on Social Security, she got an educational benefit of $79 a month while she was in school. When she got out of school, that money went away. That paid our rent for another year and a half until she graduated from college. And when she did, she graduated in May and we got married in June. And so that $79, I understand more than metaphorically that people have to make choices in their life and do things in a different order. But along with what you're saying, they're not only not getting married to the degree that they used to, they're not able to get into homes, they're not having children. I read a really kind of an amazing statistic this morning. They were saying 30% of all for-profit community colleges in the United States have closed since 2015. You got to let that sink in. They're not closing because people can't afford to go to school. They're not closing because they don't have value anymore. They're closing because there aren't enough kids going to college. They're not coming of age. We hit a point, I don't know, 2008, where this whole new generation, they're now going to be 18 years old this coming year. There's going to be a crisis with people applying to college this coming fall. So we're going to see our entire, higher education system put at risk over a whole lot of different issues. And one of which was really the worst was the fact that the government backed the wrong horse. They backed the institutions, in terms of beefing them up and putting money into the pockets of all the people associated with higher education. They took salaries from the 1970s till now, and they didn't raise them tenfold, they raised them 25-fold. You have professors that were working for $11,000 or $12,000 a year in 1975 that now typically make upwards of $150,000 to $200,000 a year. So there's that. The other part of it is that everybody thinks that that's a lot of money. No, it's not a lot of money. They were actually more wealthy at $12,000 a year. That money would buy more things, get them more experiences than their $150,000 will get them now. So, it's like I have friends and they're telling me how great they're doing with gold. Gold's up to $2,600 an ounce. And I said, you're foolish. You think you've got a little bit of gold and it's worth $2,600 an ounce. Look at your debt. Your debt is 20 times that. What you owe on your home, you'll never pay it back. What you owe, on credit cards, what you owe on that fancy car, your dollars are worthless. If gold, which was originally $20 an ounce, ladies and gentlemen, remember way back when? Until the 1930s, it was $20 an ounce. Then it went to like $32 an ounce until Nixon, took us off the gold standard worldwide. And now gold is 2,600. That isn't a cool thing about how much gold is worth. That's how little your dollar is worth now. I mean, you got to let that sink in. We're talking like Spanish pesos.
I'm still looking back at your whole higher education thing, so I'm still backing it up gold.
Oh, I'll tell you,
And I'm
there's some
sitting there
crossroads coming.
because I feel like there's multiple things that have now come into play going forward for us, and not necessarily in a negative way, but just in a life altering way.
Yeah,
And that is AI and automation, which I think is going to reframe like a lot of jobs and a lot of the job market. I feel is going to be quite interesting. I think our, like you were speaking about to begin with, our natural disasters, which I think is, you know, hugely interesting. And then I think that we've done a very, you talk about debt and the dollar. I think, when my friend Mohiba this morning was talking about, and she was talking about basically she's a minimalist and basically what that means to her being minimalist and throughout her life. And basically her whole philosophy was you can only wear one pair of shoes at one time. You can only sleep in one bed, kind of thing. And having homes that are far larger than you need for people and tax on those resources and what that means for you. And then also, like when I moved, I was very conscious of that where I moved, I could stay in if I needed to for the rest, like till I was in my older years.
yes,
Like I have a bedroom on the main floor. My master bedroom's on the main floor. I have a full bath on the main floor. If I needed, I have a basement right now. My laundry is there, but there are hookups on the main floor. So I could have a laundry on the main floor. And so that was really, and I did that intentionally, not because I needed it right now, because I was thinking of ahead and realizing that I was in my last house for 30 years. So if I'm
right.
in this house for 30 years, God willing, then I wanted to be prepared. Like I didn't want to have to be required to move because my house would, like, I couldn't stay in my home.
Yeah, good luck if you're coming, up now.
Right. I mean, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine who's in her late 70s. And so she lives in a very, very old house in Cambridge. And she
Yeah,
was saying she got hurt like last year. And all of a sudden it made her think that this is a really, like, she's in a really bad house as far as like aging in place.
right.
Like it's very old. And I think either that happens where so I don't know that people actually think about those things when they're thinking about where they live and what they do. And the fact that, I mean, I've been to Europe enough times to know that apartments abroad are really small. Like people
Yes.
don't have a huge amount of like that whole idea of a mega mansion. I don't think maybe it's that way now, but when I was in, I went to school there. And when I was there, no, I mean, people lived in really small places.
It's kind of interesting that you say that because I watch YouTube videos and I watch people from all over the world. And about a month ago, I was watching this Russian guy talking about apartment that he was moving out of and a new apartment that he was moving into. Now, first of all, it's a given over there that you will not live alone. No,
Mhm.
no one person makes enough money doing, stuff with their hands. The bottom 50% and in their case, this is probably close to 70% of their population. Single people have to live together. Uh, Married couples have to both work. It's the same as here. There's a lot of things that are different. Their quality of life is quite different in terms of how much time they get off, what's covered, that they don't have to pay for out of pocket, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, he said it's just a given. So when I looked for a new apartment, I looked for something with 3 bedrooms so that I could have 2 roommates and pay less money per month out of my pocket to be able to have a nice kitchen, a nice living room, nice bathroom. Okay. And he was moving into a mansion of 650 square feet with 3 bedrooms.
Well, it makes me, I mean, I think about my first apartment when I lived in the city. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 bathrooms. I had 3 roommates. So there were 2 of us in each room sharing a bathroom.
Right.
And and it happened to have been in a really great neighborhood because I wanted to live in the city. And then finally reaching the point where I'm like, I don't want to live with anybody anymore. Like I
Right.
had enough of the roommate thing and I moved over to Brooklyn and I literally lived in like a 2-room apartment. So I had a bedroom and the kitchen was in the living room. So it was like a Pullman kitchen. So it was very little space. It was beautiful. I mean, it was very nice, but it was like, and the guy, the one thing about that when we talk about small, I remember the landlord coming in one day and he said, "You have not wasted an inch in this apartment. Like you have created storage where I would never have thought to have storage," kind of thing. And you tend to be very neat because if you're not neat, it's like mass mayhem. So you tend to have a little and like it's very well organized because otherwise it feels to me it feels claustrophobic. So there's this idea of like, okay, well, everything has its place.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Place for everything and everything in its place. That's a
that's right, exactly. And so as you talk about that, but I think you're right. I think that this whole idea of living alone and I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day and we were talking about like one is like communal living. So one is going back to the whole idea of like communal living where each person has maybe their own like whether if it's a house or if it's um a development like or some sort of community where each like family or person has their own sort of individual home. Maybe that's a living room, dining room, and a kitchen, like a kitchen. But then there's a
sure.
common area, which is definitely for, where you could have community meals and there could be community events. But going back to that sort of almost like creating a family because families are so dispersed now. So creating your own family basically or a family type environment.
Yep.
And I've thought about that a lot because I have a number of friends who, for whatever reason, whether it be divorced or have lost their partner because they've passed away. And so they live alone. And, there is great, there is, first of all, you would solve that whole element of loneliness because you would have a community of people that are around you.
Yes.
And it's different than just being in an over 55 community, for example, because in this case, there is that communal aspect.
Right.
And everybody is basically independent. So it's not like an assisted living type situation. So that's like, so I have a friend in Canada who really wanted to develop, like, she was working really hard at developing something like that where she lived.
Well, if you think about it, Jan, it would be really brilliant. Did you ever live on a kibbutz by any chance?
No, but I've been to enough of them.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I've never been, but when we were in college, we lived across the street from a really beautiful man. His name was Bob Walters. His dad, of all things, was the president of Clairol, and Bob was going to University of Connecticut to become a polymer chemist. And so he was writing his. Are you ready for this? I haven't talked about this in 50 years. His thesis was on the cross linking polyvinyl chloride. Oh, no, the migration and oxidation of cross linked polyvinyl chloride. Now,
Love
that's
it. I
that's
love
if
it.
that's not a rifle shot for a PhD thesis, did it land him a big job with Dow Midland? It sure as hell did. He walked right straight into a six-figure job working in a Dow in Michigan. But I told you that story to tell you this one. He had spent time before he went to college, I think a year, in a kibbutz in
Mhm.
Beersheba, if I remember correctly. And he talked about that with so much, kind of joy and reverence in his face. When he talked about it, he said that was one of the happiest times he ever had. It was simple. It wasn't like living at his parents' home. He had no responsibilities, but he had accountabilities. And there were things, every person had jobs to do. And he said it's organized like a big family, as it would be, if there were just too many people for the mom to do everything for you. Everyone had cooking responsibilities, cleaning responsibilities, and they cycled through all of it. And he said the other educational part of it too, he said he learned more about his religion during that 1 year than he had the rest of his entire time on the planet.
Mhm.
And most of what he learned was from other people telling them what it was like for them to be a Jew, you know? And he said it wasn't always just in their stories. Sometimes it was in how they talked, the words they used, how they would slide back and forth between three different languages, English, Hebrew, and Yiddish.
Mhm.
And he said what was really funny is it took me a little while to be able to understand everything that they were saying, because Israeli Hebrew is not the same thing as New York Hebrew. It's
Well,
not
it's
ecumenical
definitely
Hebrew.
different. It's definitely different than biblical Hebrew, because biblical Hebrew
Exactly.
is like ancient Hebrew, and modern Hebrew is different. Like everything, it's kind of like us reading Old English
Yes.
versus English now,
Agree.
and so. But yeah, my cousins were very involved in the development of kibbutz in Israel. So, which a lot of them were formed after the war, after World War II, when people came over and lived in communities. Um, and there is something about that whole communal living. And I think, another beautiful thing after spending time on one, but also in that environment, is that, like, not only does everybody have a job, let's say, or you kind of contribute to the communal living part of it,
Right.
was the fact that you have, like, everybody's your parent,
Yeah.
and there is that whole sense of, if somebody is sick, ill, older, everybody helps.
Right.
So this whole idea of, like, you're if you go out and you don't behave well, you better watch out, because it doesn't matter who's the adult there, but some adult there is going to correct you, whether they're your parents or not. Somebody's going to say something because you're not acting properly. Like if you're rowdy, or if you don't do something, like somebody's going to chime in and say, and that probably it's going to get back to your parents,
Yeah.
in some way. Like somebody's going to make a call or pick up the phone, or see your mother over laundry and say, I saw so and so today, and they were like being really rowdy, or they or they were in a fight or whatever. So nothing is quiet. So there is
He just
this.
called that the neighborhood.
Right, the neighborhood, exactly. And there was like, when I grew up, it was kind of like we all, like, were in each other's houses all day. We lived on a cul-de-sac,
Yep.
which eventually got opened up, but still, like, the part of that we were on, were all kids, and we were all in each other's houses all the time. And still there are places like that, but a lot not. And I think that whole idea of communal living, it just seems like, or just those communal living, and the fact of also, like, being able to um s- create more sustainability and more resources for people, whether those be people, like resources, not in a bad way, but resources, whether they be people, utilities, food, but like resources, because I look at not in a negative way, but each one of us has value. And that's what I think of as resources, like conserving, having more value with
Yeah.
less waste.
Well, I'll tell you what. I definitely see the value of the communal living contributing to both social and life skills. Like you said, inappropriate behavior will be dealt with immediately, and not all things are punishable by death, right? So the
Exactly.
closest I came to that sort of communal living, which was ridiculous, was my college dormitory. Now, that's not necessarily a place where you go to learn good social skills. You get all the social skills. Everything's there, and it really takes a strong person with a good sense of self to walk into this situation and go, no, I don't actually have to play every time somebody proposes a new game of life. There are some things that I can decline and go back and maybe read a book instead, or study for an exam. Well, no, I mean, why would you want to go and do a thing like that, right? So so here we are, um, going through kind of like a retrospective of a life with all these different experiences and different periods of time where I think we had a sense of belonging. And it's like one of these things where it opens and it closes, to all our different sort of emotional relationships to gatherings of people near and far, that when we are at a point in our life, and I mean, all of us have had breakdowns where things were just not going well at all in many different times in our lives. And it would be different to reach out to somebody. um, and if tears were involved, it was really, that was DEF CON 5. If you were crying about something, that meant you were really upset about it. And that didn't take a whole lot of explaining to people before they would ask you what they could do to help. Now, in most cases, they couldn't do anything and you probably couldn't articulate it. But here we are now, and we're talking about, again, wouldn't it be cool if we decided, rather than giving all the money we've earned over our lifetime to a home that charges $4,000 to $7,000 a month for you to live there,
I
that
hate to tell you that I've looked into it recently. It's probably up to 10 to 12, if not more a month.
fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, just so you know.
Yeah. So my point is this: if we lived together, say we just bought a big old house, or like me, I've got 5 bedrooms here. And we bought this house when we were in our early 20s, and we bought it from Jan's parents. There's no way that the two of us could have, ever pulled off this deal based on where we were, in life financially, or any other way. But here we are. We've lived here for, believe it or not, 46 years, going on 47 years this year, 2025. So now, wouldn't it be cool if there were other people who had assets that they could convert into cash, and then we all just kind of like move in together, and we share the overhead, and we all do our own things in terms of how we want to. Well, gee, that would be an awful lot like living in a home, except for we're not paying out of pocket every single month at an exorbitant rate, and having people who, the overhead of the administrative department and the people who are making six figures and the rest of it. I don't know. um, it worked fine when I was, in my 20s. How would it work now that I'm in my 70s?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, love the idea. And like I said, I've spoken to a number of people about this, and I have different friends looking to sort of do that with different groups, like with different friends. And I think that, to me, there's something about it that seems really beautiful, especially like I said, in a day and age where people are not close to, let's say, live in proximity to their children or to
Right.
family. People who would have been there if they, years ago, like, maybe your family, but like I know my parents both lived with their grandparents at points. My father lived with his grandfather his whole, like, till he basically left and got married. Um, or soon or right before because he passed away. But it was, his whole like until he was at least in college, if not more. And my
Right.
mother lived with her grandmother until she got married and she left home. And
Right.
so there was that. And so since we don't have those very rarely, at least in the US, do we have those circumstances? I think creating family or creating communities is really a beautiful idea because I think it's the only way we can move forward in a
Right.
way. I think, and not, like you said, not have to spend, and whether that be in one house or in an area of a number of houses, but where we're not, where we get to assist each other, support each other, and that, and what that looks like.
Yep. Yeah. It's amazing to me to think about where we are right now, the level of community that we actually have today. And if I were drawing a map of my community in 2025, it would look quite different than it would have even in 2015. Even at that point, I was still involved with 11 or 12 different networking groups, from building upgrades and manufacturing companies to just chambers of commerce. I belonged to At one point I belonged to four, but I was active in three of them. So I don't know. There's a part of me also that's basically saying, in my life, I've done everything I can to help as many people as I possibly can whenever it came up. I still do that now. But you know what, Jan? Sometimes when I help people now, it's like where we started in the first part of this conversation. The half life of remembering that there was a mitzvah, it's over very quickly. They're just getting sucked up into a world that's demanding so much for them. And then, and there's no question, while I am helping them, and I'm not doing it for any other reason than they're my friend.
Mhm.
But what I notice is that when there's a need for the help, the the friendship and the being together and the need to see each other goes away as their need goes away. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. But I think sometimes what you're talking about is, you know, as I listen to you, I'm thinking about getting clear on the help. So maybe what you're hearing and offering as far as help is not really what the person wants or needs. So that could be one aspect that comes into play. So they leave because maybe it's not being fulfilled. For example, they're going, okay, I got to shop around because I've got to get an answer, or I do need help or whatever. Just as a on another note,
Yeah.
the other aspect, I agree with you. It's kind of like when somebody gets into a relationship and then all of a sudden they disappear from the face of the earth. You're their
Yeah.
friend until they have a significant other, and then all of a
Right.
sudden that person draws all their attention. And I think we've all had that through the years where I remember it especially as a kid, where all of a sudden somebody would be dating somebody, and then all of a sudden they weren't like you didn't exist anymore. It was kind of like, so when it happens in
Until they
life.
got dumped and then they were back on your couch all the time.
Right, exactly, exactly. And so I think that that does happen. And the question is like, what could we guide people or suggest to people to do? And I guess my one thing would be don't stop reaching out. Um, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just
Get better skills at reaching out.
and maybe get clearer on what you need.
Well, see,
Um,
there's a sense of if you do need something that you shouldn't. You really shouldn't need it. And so it's kind of like hard to even bring it up or talk about it, right?
well, I think that that's been the story. Like I said, it's very hard to ask for help. And I think the other thing that happens, and I was thinking about this not too long ago. I think that when something like if you're going through something and then some sort of catastrophe happens in the world,
Right.
like you read about somebody who's lost their home in a fire, all of a sudden it's not that your problem is less important to you, but you kind of feel funny bringing it up because there's someone out there who's suffering more.
Yep.
And that doesn't take away from the fact that whatever you're going through is hard. But I think we tend to kind of almost clam up and not say anything because we listen to the news or we hear about people and we're like, well, comparatively speaking, my problem's not really a problem. Like I
Right.
still have a house over my head and whatever. And so I think sometimes that's also limits us because we're like hesitant because one is we don't like to ask for help. And two is because we listen and we hear about circumstances which are far worse than whatever we're going through. And then we're hesitant because we're like, oh, okay, really what I'm complaining about or what I'm like, is bothering me is really not as monumental as what other people are going through in the world, whether that be from war or natural disaster or illness or whatever. I mean, take your pick.
Yeah. I don't know. All I can tell you is that when we're talking to people, we've got the possibility of creating something. You know, in a conversation with someone else, we can do anything. And I would say the greater our relationship with each other, the more we can risk in the conversation, and therefore the greater the reward is possible. And what's interesting to me about that is that um, I don't know that there are a lot of people these days that are willing to play at that level. I think that's what I'm seeing that's
Mm.
kind of missing out there is that there are people who would much rather um, try to get it done themselves, you know. And I watch people struggling, you know, especially trying to get their small businesses up and running. And I'm more than happy, you know, to come in and sit down and help them develop a set of metrics, some processes and procedures, some small steps that they can take, you know, to start building up something so that there's things that happen automatically in their routine, and it starts to bring money in, and they start ringing the cash register. But I've sat here for 3 or 4 years hanging out with a whole lot of different people from a networking standpoint and watched them continuously just change to try to do something new because the thing they tried last didn't work. And what is painfully obvious to me is they're bringing the same mindset and skills to each new thing that they're trying to take on and get good at. Only now they've got a new learning curve for them to understand the jargon and understand how it works and understand how to communicate it to other people. And from that standpoint, um, I just wonder if people are just not willing to take the time to learn how to do something anymore. They want to just do point and click, and it either works or it doesn't. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody early, like right before we got on, and we were talking about the work it takes, like the work it takes to um change a habit, to like change a mindset,
Right.
to change. And I brought up the fact that being who we are, I've done lots of different trainings through the years, lots of self-development stuff, lots of meditation, lots of yoga. And I would leave and think, oh, well, this is the be all end all. Like, this is it. And then one is go home and all of a sudden, um, like it didn't work. And then all of a sudden realizing, like, after a period of time, well, that's because I didn't do anything after I left. Like, I mean, I learned it, but then I didn't implement it. And the difference is finding some part of your life you can add it into. So whether you call that habit stacking or marrying it with another task that you do. For example, when I'm telling people to use essential oils every day, I always say put it by your toothbrush because most of the time you brush your teeth every day. So it just reminds you, especially if it sits out, that it's there. Until then it becomes like it's not. Until then it's not like a habit or whatever, because they're not, unless you're trained that way and you're brought up that way. But
Right.
this whole idea of okay, well, I'm going to practice this, and putting an alarm on your phone, a reminder to help you do whatever that is, like using whatever it is technology. And I'm not saying, and making it manageable. So it's not like it's a few minutes. So if you have something you're going to do, is don't have it require a whole lot of your time to me, because that requires the fact that that just gets overwhelming, because then we think we can't change anything
Right.
because, oh my gosh, it takes so much time. And right now my time is so limited that, we get overwhelmed. So make it simple, really simple.
Yeah. Yeah. So here we are. We're at the beginning of 2025. And before we know it, the year will be half over. And what will it take for 2025 to be the year that all things are possible?
Are you asking me or are you just commenting?
No, the silence I think was a pretty good response, you know?
Okay. Okay.
And I really think that, there needs to be a large group of people engaging that question. What would the world look like if this were the year of expanding possibility for which there are no limits? And if we can design it and speak it into existence, and we can practice it and we can make it real, um, how does that change the way that the world is speaking first and then operating second? Because there's a lot of people right now who don't think the world is on the right track. I'm sure there are some people that think it's doing great. I think most of the people that I know are faced with challenges that they consider to be pretty large.
I agree with you. Me too. Most of the people I know are working with, I think, things that they would consider pretty large at the moment.
Yeah. So here we are again, having had another great conversation. And we started off talking about, um, I guess we talked about, you know, getting what we need from other people, to some degree, and we really kind of went a long way around to come right back to where that is present again. And I think 2025 is probably a year to really get a lot more interested in relationship.
And I'll just clarify that, Bill, because I love what you just said. But as you were talking, I thought to myself, relationship, but I thought to myself, relationship with yourself. Like, I wrote a blog this week, or just a post that I haven't put out there yet, but was about, for me, yoga has always been more than just a physical practice. It's a conversation I have with myself, you know, and it's a relationship I have with myself that I've built. And so it became much more like, as I moved and became deliberate in my practice, it was kind of like, okay, well, I had to listen to my body. So it was this element of listening, of like,
Yep.
okay, because when I didn't listen, I got hurt, or I didn't feel anything. So it was like, how can I listen? And how can I have this conversation with myself and be willing to stay? Having a conversation with yourself sometimes is really hard if you're going through a hard stuff, the last, as I say, the last person I want to be with is with me. I want to do something to escape. That's really, as we all do.
Good
And
luck with that.
good luck with that. Right. But I mean, we all do the things that we distract ourselves with. And so I think that in relationship, or if I think about relationship, I think about like, okay, like, you know, how do I relate to myself? How do I converse with myself? How do I talk to myself? What do I say? Let alone other people, because if we don't, I'm a firm believer, if we don't treat ourselves well, we probably don't treat other people very well either.
We're
Just
probably
say,
not going to be all that interested in other people.
right, we're not.
Like, what's the point?
Hmm.
However, fall in love with someone, You want to shift your dynamic? Suddenly give a good rap about someone. It could be a baby, could be a pet. The world opens up and the vibe is different when you really do care about something, and there's a locus in the universe where you can focus that attention and all of those great emotions, that give you endorphins and kind of give you a reason to be and a reason to believe.
Love that, Bill.
Me too. And I love those little pauses. I think they're the best. So what do you think? Should we put a cherry on top?
Yeah, I do. I think we should. I think we should. And I love this idea of, how do you relate to yourself? And how do you relate to others? And if you're looking in relationship, it's not, it's a true relationship, right? Is definitely not one-sided. So it's not like what's in it for me.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of a world would it be to just be interested in getting good at relationship for the sake of getting good at relationship? Not transactions, no scorekeeping. Just see if you can create love everywhere you go. What would that look like? I mean, that's what I say.
Love it.
Me too, my friend. So, do you have a request of our listeners?
So I guess practice getting a relationship. So maybe that's, and to me, getting a relationship, like if you want to get down to the base to me, is its presence, being present. It's like the one word if I was to describe it. It's like get present with yourself, get present for somebody else. Presence. If you need a word for the new year, I always choose a word. I have a word already, 2 words for my year. But if you need a word for the new year, that's a really great word, presence.
Present. It's equivalent to all of it. Mm-hmm. What are you present to? All of it.
All of it.
It's good. I think you can come up with the worst things to work on in 2025.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So reach out to someone, make sure, take a few moments and just be present for them.
While you're being present, deliver a message and let them know that your life works because they're here.
Absolutely.
And if they ever need you, they may have to ask, but please ask.
You may have to ask. Love it.
Well, God bless all of you. I love you, Jan, and I'm looking forward to an amazing 2025 with you. We've got so many good things happening.
We do.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are lighting the candle, a world that works, and we're on the road to empowerment with you. And let's see if we can make a relationship here that's worth talking about. Bye for now.
Bye for now, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.